Good day, fellow no treblers. I have run a little bit dry with regard to questions, so first I would like to implore you to rack your brains and come up with some new topics. Anything music related, hit me up with anything. Yeah, I could use some more questions coming in. So, in lieu of answering questions via typing, I thought that I would do a little bit of a series of videos since people seem to really appreciate the instructional stuff as well. So maybe for the next month, 6 weeks, we'll see. Do a handful of videos on various aspects of my playing style and things that I've come to understand. And I figured I'd start off with grabbing some technical exercises from one of my books, shameless plug. I have two books. Right Hand Drive is primarily oriented around my three-finger technique and ways to develop facility with your plucking hand as well as your fretting hand. And then I also have the Improviser's Path, which is more focus. Very much oriented around understanding jazz harmony and theory and understanding how to play through changes and building up your knowledge base and introducing you to improvisational the fundamentals and some techniques, and there's all kinds of stuff in there. So enough of that. I wanted to show you guys kind of the crux of a lot of the right hand hibbity flibbity stuff that I do. As many of you know, I kind of broke down my rhythmic exercises and approached them almost like drum rudiments. So I have a series of 3-stroke rolls, 4-stroke rolls, 5-stroke rolls, 2-stroke rolls, 6-stroke rolls, all kinds of stuff, different finger combinations, different patterns you can play with your hand. One of the things I get asked about a fair amount by students and on No Treble more than once is one aspect of it, which is kind of a percussive thump. You may have heard me and people have asked me about getting some of those types of sounds. So I grabbed a handful of exercises out of the book. Essentially some 2, 3, and a 4-stroke and a 5-stroke pattern, plucking pattern. And I thought I would explain that aspect of the technique a little bit, because it does, in the right context, it can add a little bit of an extra, little bit of spice. I call them percussive thumps. I do them not only with my thumb, but also with my index and my middle finger. And essentially, all I am doing when I'm playing is coming down on the string, leaving my finger on the string, and then plucking. So it's kind of a twofer. You get one motion down, rhythmic strike, and then pluck the string, getting a note or another just muted rhythmic strike. So first step would be to simply just get comfortable with that motion. This is all about muscle memory. So I would start with one note, and then eventually all of these exercises I always started with one note, just getting it comfortable in the right hand. Once it was comfortable in the right hand, then I would start introducing melodic patterns to get myself actually using the technique around the instrument. By melodic patterns, it could be anything: scales, arpeggios, bass lines you already know, anything. Just get you moving around the instrument. So initially, I'm just going to mute the strings so nothing comes through, and I'm just going to practice going down on the string, plucking. Not too hard. You don't want to just doink it, but also not too soft. You want to be able to hear it. So, apologies for that edit. My battery died. So we're going to practice finger by finger, one by one, getting a good, solid connecting rhythm way down, leaving your finger on the string. Don't bounce like you're slapping, but just straight down, stop on the string, and then pluck across. So it's kind of a down and across. So that's with my thumb. Index finger. Now if you're using your fingers, you can just kind of bang all the fingers down on the strings. You get a little more bang for your buck. Middle and index. Apologies for flipping you guys off. So anything I do, whether it's going to be entirely useful or whether I know I'm going to use it or not, I tend to try and hit every variation just so I get a more well-rounded understanding physically and mentally and emotionally of what I'm trying to accomplish and what I'm trying to do. And I figure if nothing else, it just makes my right hand a little more versatile, or whatever it is I'm working on, left hand, right hand, understanding notes. A little bit of a more well-rounded approach. So I hit every variation. I probably don't do the pluck middle thing all that much in real life, but can't hurt. Now that I've, and it'll take you guys a few minutes, hours, days, weeks to get comfortable with that. Now I'm going to give you some basic plucking patterns. We already established the two-stroke rolls. So like I said, now that you're getting a little comfortable with that, you can practice doing that up the scale. With the thumb, with the index. Middle, and so on and so forth. Now for some three-stroke patterns. Now I'm going to label these percussive thumb, and then label the finger that I'm going to do a stroke with. Thumb. And this first one in the book, it's labeled percussive thumb, thumb, 1. So it's essentially kind of a three-stroke roll. Could be a triplet, could be anything. You can think of this as kind of almost like an open hammer slap type of thing, except we're going, you can do it on one string, octaves. Like I said, hit all the variations. For a long time I didn't work all of these techniques on one string, and then I realized that I was a little bit limited when I would try and play them, so I started doing them all on one string as well. Hit all the variations so nothing takes you by surprise on the gig. So like I said, metronome, or no, you can just sit there and just get it going. Eventually I kind of like getting a metronome going. So I can play around with different subdivisions as well. If I have let me get a little metronome going. You can get some, turn some of these around on themselves. For example, just because you're playing a three-stroke pattern doesn't mean you need to play eighth note triplets. So if I have a click going right there, hopefully you guys can hear that all right. Got my eighth note triplets, right? 3 strokes per beat. But I can also do 16th notes. So I sped up. All right, 3, 4. So on and so forth. You can pick any rhythmic variation, 16th notes, 8th notes, triplets. Use your imagination. So that was percussive thumb, thumb, index. Now, so we cover all the bases, we're going to do percussive thumb, second finger. Same thing, just using middle instead of index. And now you can see my hand, I keep it pretty kind of curved, almost like I'm holding on to a small handlebar loosely. Accompanying my uncle Peter Erskine on a drum clinic he did once. Long story short, at some point he had everybody walking in place, and then he had them stop and hold their elbows up so their hands were in front of them. And you'll notice your hand generally comes up with this nice natural curve to it. He talked about that being essentially the perfect grip for holding a drumstick. But likewise, it's kind of the perfect hand shape for me. Everybody's physiology is a little different, so this may be a little bit different for everybody based on what your hand does naturally. But it's also the perfect shape for me when playing with this kind of a technique. It's similar to the way Matt Garrison holds his hand when he does his four-finger stuff. I can't do the four-finger stuff. My ring finger apparently isn't connected to my brain properly. But for this kind of a thing, just imagine a little bit of a light arc, essentially playing with your fingertips. And you don't need to play that hard. Like I said, just hard enough that everything's present and you're playing with authority. So, percussive thumb, thumb, index. Percussive thumb, thumb, middle, second. Now we also have percussive, I wrote something. Percussive index. We could do percussive index thumb 1, percussive index thumb 2. Like I said, all the variations. Percussive 1, 1, thumb. It's a little bit harder to get a good snap if you're playing on the same string. Again, that's not something I actually use, it's just hitting all of the variations. One of the more useful ones, aside from the just straight up percussive thumb, thumb 1, which is very useful for me, is introducing open strings and hammer-ons. You do percussive thumb, open string, hammer. I get a lot of mileage out of open strings and hammer-ons when doing a lot of these rudimentary type of exercises, because you get, again, it's efficiency. You're getting more notes sounding than you actually have to pluck. So again, percussive thumb, then hit the open string, and then hammer. So on. Now you may wonder, what if I'm playing in A flat? The open strings are going to clash, right? Well, technically yes, and especially if you're playing at a slow tempo. If we're playing in that tonality, every time we hit an E, it's going to clash a little bit. Open E, open A. But, like I said, if you're doing it slow, that's going to sound a little wonky. But a lot of this stuff is kind of better, more applicable at faster tempos. Or it sounds pretty fancy at faster tempos. And when you're playing at faster tempos, it would be a little bit of an overkill bass line. But you can see it doesn't impact the harmony all that much because it's so fleeting. It just kind of zips right on by. It becomes more of a percussive effect than a harmonic effect. Also, you'll notice that I wasn't hammering every note, you know, meaning like hitting really hard. Because it's not musical. And when you one of the steps later in the book is to start introducing accents and controlling your flow of the lines. You don't want everything to be just, you know, powering straight through. I like to shape those kinds of fast little rolls. You know, so it becomes a little more subtle. All of this stuff, it's kind of ripe for to be abused. You always need to think musically, but I've always believed that it's helpful to have more technique than you need the vast majority of the time, because I never want to have to struggle to play when I'm playing anything. I never want to have to think about how to play what I'm playing. So I always thought, let me just make my technique as good as I can, you know, without obsessing on it and only ever thinking technique, but I always was conscious to try and make my technique pretty solid, so that when it came to making music, I could phrase naturally and effortlessly and play the music easily and comfortably, and therefore musically. But I digress. Let's see, more patterns. Percussive, index, index, thumb. It's hard not to mute one of those notes when doing it on one string. But if you do an octave, you know, it's a little more functional. So now, let's go ahead and do a 4-stroke roll. This is one I use a lot. It is a percussive thumb. Actually, there's two 4-stroke rolls I'll show you. Percussive thumb, thumb, 1, 2. Strike, thumb, 1, 2. Strike, thumb, 1, 2. Now, if you're not comfortable using your thumb, you know, this will take a little bit. You can maybe simplify it and get rid of the percussive thumb at first and just practice going thumb, 1, 2. Once you can do that fairly comfortably, it's not too big a leap. To add that extra strike in there. So I've always had a hard time talking and playing at the same time. And break up your patterns as well. Don't just do everything over a simple major scale and then call it good. Try scales and thirds, because that gets you moving back and forth between strings. Scale and broken sixths is especially cool because it gets you string skipping. A lot of you may ask, what was I doing there? I was playing each note of the scale and the diatonic sixth above it. So I'm playing 1, 6. This is in G major. Second degree of the scale, and then the 7th, 3rd, root, 4th, 9. And so on. I like to play with a lot of those scalar patterns. I've kind of explored them all. We'll probably do some of that here in one of these videos because it's very helpful. Now I mentioned 2 4-stroke rolls. We have percussive thumb, thumb, 1, 2. I used to call these my fakey garrisons because I could never do the 4-string, the 4-finger pluck. So I figured out ways to get 4 hits with a 3-finger pluck. Now the other one is an open This is basically an open hammer slap, but open hammer slap, open hammer 1 2. Again, be able to do it on one string. Now there's a few variations and things I will do. One, I tend to keep this finger style until I get to a certain speed. Once you get past a certain speed, it becomes a little bit hard to maintain that small efficient motion. So then I tend to start bouncing off the string like I'm slapping it once I get past it. But even at lower speed, it has a different sound, so it has its use if you want. A little more aggressive. You can also be a little bit dainty with it and still bounce, especially when you get to I think that's why a lot of people think that I do the Garrison 4-finger technique, because it sounds pretty similar. But even at that, with lighter touch and lower volume, I'm still pretty much just bouncing off the string, because at least for me, I'm able to do it faster than I can straight finger style with a static hand. Now you can also, doesn't have to be open string hammer, you can also do pull-offs. A little bit of a different thing, a little bit harder for me personally because I haven't done that as much, but like I said, there's a lot of variations available to you. Kind of your only real limits are your imagination and the amount of time you put in the shed. So I'm good at the things I practice, not so good at all of the variations, but I list quite a few variations, just trying to hit as many functional looking patterns and sounding patterns as I could. Last one, 5-stroke pattern. There's a variation on that, kind of just an expansion on that. Percussive thumb, open, hammer. So there's 3 right there, which we were doing early on. I think we did that early on. If not, we should have. Percussive, open, hammer, and then 1 2. Again, I like to practice these with a metronome, and I practice playing different subdivisions. Just because I'm playing a 4-stroke pattern doesn't mean I need to play a rhythmic subdivision, a rhythmic division of 2 or 4. I can play, and actually this stuff starts to sound pretty cool when you do this. So say we have our quarter note here. I'll add the 16th note so you can hear it. Now what if I play 8th note triplets? But use a 4-finger pattern. I'll do open, hammer, pluck, pluck. 3, 4. Those were 16th note triplets, I think. Put an accent on 1. B. and make sure I'm hitting those triplets right. Let me speed this up and do eighth note triplets. I should probably edit this, but I may not. I also like using this technique with chords, and I'll just do let's do an E major diatonic chords. Let's see if I can do that. And there, I'm trying to hold each note and just hammer, which means I'm hammering with 3 different fingers: hammering, index, ring, pinky. It feels a little funny, but you know, this is a lot of different things you can do with this technique. I just wanted this to be a basic introduction into using your thumb. So work these slowly, get out the metronome, and practice just the simplest versions of things first. Just practice getting that percussive thumb stroke. That's the most important one for my money. Get it with the other fingers as well, and then start practicing different patterns. Groupings of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. See what you can come up with. That's a new one. Percussive thumb, thumb, index, slap, or hammer. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Down, thumb, 1. Let's see if I can use it. Yeah. Not smooth yet, but I might work on that. It's not in the muscle memory at all. All right, I'm going to work on that. I just found a new exercise. Sweet. So I hope that's helpful for some of you. And please ask Damian at notreble.com. Hit the email link. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, leave some comments. If you have any questions for me at all for future No Treble contributions, hit me with those. And also, please rack your brains and come up with some more content for me and for you. So hit me with some questions, anything music related, whether it's professional life of a musician, practicing, technique, harmony, anything. Don't matter. So yeah, right on. Hope I didn't ramble too much, and I hope this was helpful for some of you. So I will see you next week.